everyone. Welcome to People Do Want to Know podcast. Today, I'm here to share our very first episode with you featuring Dr. Dana Steiner. Dana was a little bit under the weather when we recorded this episode. She wanted me to give all of you a heads up, but as you'll hear, she sounded great. I'll take a moment to read her bio, and then I'll walk you through what you can expect from today's episode. It's a longer episode, so take breaks as you need, and hopefully you love it. Dr. Dana Steiner is Director of Access Global at American Jewish Committee, where she oversees an international program to engage young professionals through transformative leadership development, hands-on advocacy, and philanthropy. American Jewish Committee, or AJC, is one of the oldest Jewish advocacy groups established in 1906. AJC will do global diplomacy and political advocacy, as well as coalition building with other communities worldwide. They also do strategic communications on behalf of the Jewish people and Israel, which Dana will tell you more about. Prior to AJC, Dana served as manager of Jewish leadership and impact at the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at New York University. Dana has also been assistant director of Reshet Ramah Alumni and Community Engagement Network, a teaching fellow at the American Hebrew Academy in Greensboro, North Carolina, and a facilitator for Moving Traditions. Dana holds a PhD in Education and Jewish Studies from NYU, an MA in Jewish Experiential Education from Jewish Theological Seminary, and a BEd in Secondary History from McGill. Dana is committed to advancing women and girls in both the Jewish communal and secular professional space. She also serves on the board of directors for Illuminate, a Jewish women's social entrepreneurial organization. In addition to all of these accomplishments, she's an alumna of the Onboard New York City Fellowship, the Shalom Hartman's Institute inaugural Created Equal seminar, and was a member of the 2016 Present Tense cohort. Dana is also a certified 305 fitness instructor, served as a mentor for the Hillel International Springboard Fellowship, and served as faculty for the Hillel International New Professionals Institute. Dana lives on the Upper West Side with her rescue pit bull, Jet. My gosh, that was a bio, huh? All of that to say is that Dana is the first person I thought of when starting this podcast because I knew she'd have incredible talking points and stories to share, focusing on the current state of the Jewish people, anti-Semitism, and Israel. In this episode, we cover her work supporting women who work in Jewish advocacy and her take on what's happening to the Jewish community post-October 7th and many other things. The first 20 minutes cover Dana's work supporting women, and the rest of the episode focuses on the Jewish community, Israel, and events following October 7th. Please enjoy. Hey, Dana, thanks so much for coming on to our podcast. I'm so excited to have you on today. I guess let's get right to it. Tell us more about yourself. What are you working on now?
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me today. And I just want to flag, as I told you earlier, I have a little bit of a cold, so I don't normally sound this nasally, but it's actually giving Fran fine. So I'm not sad about it. On some level, I kind of am leaning into the person I think I'm most meant to be. So giving it up for Fran fine this morning. What am I working on right now? So I would say that my job is taking up a lot of time, not only since October 7th, which I'm sure we'll talk about more later today, but in general, there's just a lot going on with the Jews. It doesn't take much to find that there's a lot going on with our community. So I'm thinking a lot about how we can support our community in this moment. But outside of that, I run a consulting practice called Chutzpanit Consulting, where we work to advance early and mid-career Jewish women professionals. And actually, the last few weeks have been really busy. I've had a lot of clients, which has been amazing. A lot of women who are at really interesting junctures in their career. A lot of support thinking about where they go next. And that's been really nourishing in this moment to just have amazing conversations with women who are looking to advance in their career. It's like the one time of my week that I get to be a massive cheerleader for women. So it's really amazing. So that's definitely something I'm working on at the moment. And I'm just trying to take care of my mental and physical health, which it's like the doldrums of winter. It feels really hard to do that. 9 times out of 10, I'm like, I just want to lay on my couch and like watch TikTok. But really prioritizing cooking, eating the colors of the rainbow, trying to work out. I do 305 Fitness, which is a dance cardio class. So I'm schlepping all over the city to make sure that I'm just like working on myself. So there's a lot of really exciting things going on. But in general, just like thinking a lot about how to meet the moment that we're currently in and how I can best serve other people in doing that.
Yeah. Wow. You are doing a lot. And I guess before we address the elephant in the room, which are all the things that have happened since October 7th and the work that you do, Dana does a tremendous amount of work in this regard. I wanted to ask you, Chutzpanit Consulting is something unique. It's a consultancy that supports women that work in Jewish nonprofit and Jewish organizations. What has your experience been like? Who are these women that you're coaching? What have you learned from running this business?
Yeah. Well, it might be easier for me to also just kind of take a step back and talk about where Chutzpanit came from. So I'm going to go back in my professional journey a little bit here. So I started working for the Jews, I guess I would say, or in the Jewish communal profession when I was 23 years old. So this is really the only environment I've ever worked in. I've only worked within the Jewish community, although I've had a lot of different roles within the Jewish community. I've only worked within the Jewish communal framework. And we're really unique in a lot of ways, even though the nonprofit world or the communal world or the service world in and of itself is similar to one another. There are certain things that I would say are unique to working in the Jewish space. And a lot of those things are frankly gendered. When I first started working in the Jewish world, I was working as a teacher at a now defunct boarding school called the American Hebrew Academy. It was an amazing experience. Then I got my master's degree and started working in the Jewish communal world. And I think for me, it was one of those really interesting experiences where it occurred to me that no one had ever really taught me how to properly advocate for myself as a professional. And I remember I had gotten my first big job out of grad school and I was really excited about it. And it was with an organization I was extremely passionate about and had a lot of connection to. And they made me an offer and the offer felt really low. And I didn't know what to do. I sort of was like, okay, well, this is the offer. Are they going to take it away from me? Are they going to give me a hard time? I didn't have tools in my toolkit to really say like, this doesn't feel right. This feels really low for someone with a master's degree, for someone with some, couple years experience. And I remember I went to my parents and I said, this feels kind of low. And, my parents are incredibly well-meaning and wonderful, but they come from a different generation. And this was already almost like 15 years ago. And my parents were like, you'll make it work. Don't ruffle too many feathers. Just kind of like see where you can go from here. And that was a real moment for me in which I realized that we just don't do a great job of preparing our professionals in a way that is meaningful in terms of compensation. That was in 2013. I took the job. It was an experience that taught me a lot about life and taught me a lot about the professional world and taught me a lot about honoring the value that you bring to a role. It also was in many ways the genesis of Chutzpanit. So flash forward to 2016, I was working at the Bronfman Center for Jewish Student Life at NYU, which is effectively their Hillel. It's an amazing organization. And I had a number of students, women identified students who came up to me and were telling me about internship experiences or other experiences in which they felt either that they weren't being valued for the work they were bringing to the table, or they were not being paid at all. They were receiving no compensation. They were getting quote unquote credit, but no one really ever gets credit, college credit. I think that's like a big myth. No one gets credit. Or they were experiencing overt or subtle misogyny or sexism in all different kinds of spaces, whether it was internships, other gigs they were working, or in some cases, leadership positions as students. And something went off. And I remember having a conversation with my colleague and boss at that time, Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. And he said, this is the moment. He's like, we really need to support women and we need to do it now. And we need to figure out a way to encourage them through Jewish practice and practical leadership. And that's where Chutzpanit was born. So at the time, Chutzpanit was called Chutzpanit from campus to the C-suite. We worked with a cohort of women each semester, and it was an 8-week program where we taught them both the sort of practical skills that are needed to advance themselves in the leadership and workplace. So whether it was things like negotiation or understanding the gender wage gap or understanding why competition between women exists and sort of how society sets us up as adversaries rather than allies. And then we did it through a Jewish lens. We infused Jewish liturgy, Jewish text, Jewish tradition, and it was an amazing experience. And we also matched every woman with a mentor who was older, who most closely resembled her professional trajectory. So about 160 women went through the program. It was an amazing experience. It really defined so much of who I am. It actually defined a lot of my reasoning for why, when I ultimately became a doctoral student and was beginning to identify what research I wanted to do, I focused on advancing women in the Jewish profession. That's ultimately what I wrote about for my dissertation. When I left the Bronfman Center and came to AJC, where I work now, Chutzpanit took a little bit of a backseat. I found that I was missing that part of my life. I was missing the part where I was working with women. I missed how supportive of an environment Chutzpanit felt. It was so empowering and so inspiring. And during COVID, there were a lot of women, specifically in the Jewish communal profession, who were laid off, who were furloughed, because I don't know if you know this, but the majority of the professionals in the Jewish communal world are women. They're mostly entry and mid-level professionals, but they make up almost 70% of the workforce. So it was women who were being most adversely affected by the pandemic. And a lot of women were reaching out to me and saying, hey, do you mind looking over my resume or my cover letter? Or I want to negotiate for myself and I want to think about how to do it sensitively in this moment. That was when this aha moment came to me. And I was like, oh, this is where Chutzpanit needs to go. This is where we need to pivot. So I reached out to 2 women in my life who are just the most incredible, brilliant thought partners from different parts of my life. I reached out to my colleague, Dr. Rebecca Tokatlalar, who was my old boss at the Bronfman Center and was just like an amazing champion of Chutzpanit. And I also reached out to my best friend, Nessa Gaffen, who at the time was working in camping, and now she works for Route 1, which is a project of the Jewish Education Project. And I said, I think we should pivot Chutzpanit into being a full service consultancy where we work with early and mid-career Jewish women professionals. That's the market. These are the women who have the least resources. These are the women who have sort of the least guidance. There's a lot of leadership training programs and a lot of support for women in executive positions or C-suite positions, and very few for women who are early in their career. I said, let's take that mentality and let's take that approach that we had with Chutzpanit from campus to the C-suite and turn it into Chutzpanit Consulting. So God bless, Rebecca and Nessa came on this journey with me, and we launched Chutzpanit Consulting in April of 2021. And it's been an amazing experience. We've helped women negotiate their raises. We've helped women feel confident when it comes to interviewing for jobs. We've looked over countless resumes and cover letters. We've talked with women about how they can introduce paid leave policy to their organizations. We've done a lot of work, and all while in Nessa and Rebecca's case, they were working full-time jobs and being moms. They have gorgeous kids who are amazing, and being a mom in and of itself is so much work. So being full-time moms, being full-time, high-level Jewish communal professionals, and doing this on the side. And it's been an amazing experience. And it's very different from what I do in my day job. So in so many ways, it's so nourishing. It's so inspiring, and it brings me just so much joy. So I love doing it when clients come to us. So if anyone's listening and wants to reach out, shoot us an email, info@chutzpanit.com. We'd love to work with you.
That's awesome, Dana. This made me think of the old statistic that we always used to hear in college, that women make 70 cents for every dollar that a man makes.
It's just white women.
Yeah.
And it's 76 cents to the dollar. And if you are a Black woman or a Latina woman or an Indigenous woman, that percentage goes down significantly, which is quite upsetting, actually.
Yeah. And what I remember is when studying all of the reasons why there was that gap, one of the reasons, and I don't know which reason is most important or drives the biggest difference, but one of the reasons was that there was a gap because women weren't as likely to negotiate their salaries after the initial offer.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. There's a tremendous amount of research about why women don't do that. There's a sense that I'll be rejected, right? Women are conditioned in so many ways to say, well, if I ask, I'm not going to get it. So why would I even bother asking? There's a sense of I want to avoid humiliation at all costs. So I'm just not going to ask. And we also understand that women for centuries were conditioned to believe that they were of lesser value. So there was a study that came out of Stanford not too long ago in which they had men and women in a focus group. I think they gave them between $1 and $7. I don't remember the exact amount, but they asked the women, okay, well, how much more do you want and how much do the men want? And the men all asked for like $7 and the women asked for like $3 or something to that effect. Like they were always asking for less than what the men were asking for. In a lot of ways, it kind of reminds me of that scene, which I think all of us probably have seen if you've seen the Barbie movie, where it's like, you need to be likable, you need to be this, you need to be that, you need to bend yourself into knots. And that speech, I think, resonated with so many women because it's just like, oh my God, that's me. That's my life. That's my experience. And the reality is that even though in the last 5 to 7 years, where there has been a big cultural shift in terms of how women's voices and women's experiences are heard, doesn't always change in the way that we hope. And I think in the Jewish communal profession, if you look at the makeup of the large legacy Jewish organizations, they're primarily led by men. And if you look at the organizations that do have women in charge, they are organizations that are primarily focused on the social justice space, which is amazing. And it's also an extension of what people see as women's roles, which is that they're nurturing, they're caring, they're helping people. That's the role that they are able to fulfill. They're not able to fulfill the role, or it's perceived. I think they certainly are capable, but it's perceived that they're not able to fulfill the role of an advocacy organization, of a political organization, of a major organization that's changing the way the Jewish communal world works. And it's something I'm really passionate about. And I think that's why Chutzpanit is working so hard to try and advance early and mid-career women professionals, to give them the confidence that like you deserve that spot in the C-suite. And we want to do what we can to try and get them.
I want to add or dig a little bit deeper, on what you said, because when I studied at Penn, I took a negotiation course and my degree was in behavioral science. So we studied the research behind the mechanism of why this dynamic exists, this difference in perception between men and women. And what I learned across the research is exactly what you said, which is women are perceived as nurturing or communal, whereas men are perceived as individualistic. So when a woman comes and attempts to negotiate her salary and doesn't frame the conversation as a communal oriented conversation, it breaks the social norm of how people are used to perceiving the woman. So it appears selfish and it appears like she's asking for a lot. But when a man does the same, because the norm is that a man is individualistic, it doesn't appear strange at all. What that behavioral research found is that the optimal way for a woman to advocate for a higher salary is to try to blend the norm of appearing communal while also asking for the same outcome by framing the argument in a lens of, by giving me more money, you are doing everything that's better for the business, and here's how. So framing it back to here's how it's better for everyone if I make more, which seems a little bit strange, but that's what that research found.
Yes, and it's true. I think women often find themselves in the position of a double bind, right? On the one hand, if they present qualities that are seen as masculine, which includes being agentic or individualistic or touting their capability and strength, it's seen as like bossy, unattractive, and annoying. But if they present themselves as nurturers or communal leaders or as helpers, they're seen as weak. So that's a double bind. You're screwed. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But I think one of the things that a lot of different scholars and practitioners talk about is, the best way to address these issues. And I actually wrote about this in my doctoral dissertation, is something called the dual agenda. It basically argues that we should be aiming for equity and effectiveness in the workplace, the dual agenda of equity and effectiveness, which means that women should be able to bring their full selves into the workplace, which includes their personal lives, their family, their children, the various things that they have outside of the workplace, because oftentimes the workplace creates these two spheres. There's the work and there's the home, and those things cannot blend. And when you blend them, then it's messy and everything is bad. And I think what the scholars and practitioners who talk about the dual agenda suggest is that actually, if we honor and name that people have lives outside of the workplace, and we give them the flexibility to address those things, then they can be effective. It's about effectiveness at the end of the day. You want to be an effective leader. You want to run an effective and efficient workplace. And to deny or ignore that people have lives outside of the workplace and responsibilities denies the ability to be effective. So we're not talking about setting an equal playing field for people in the workplace. We're talking about an equitable field. And that applies to men too. Men are also parents. Men are also caregivers. To deny that they should not lean into that role, honestly, is ridiculous. And I think that's one of the reasons why anytime I talk to my male identified friends or colleagues, I always encourage them to take full parental leave if it's offered to them, because it sets a precedent that when men take paid leave, it sets a precedent that parenting is important and that taking the time off to raise and be with their children is a value and it's important, and it won't affect your work in the sense that if you are working in an effective workplace, plans are put in order to ensure that the work continues, right? It's all about being thoughtful and intentional. You know a baby's coming, you have 9 months to plan for it. Let's be planful here. But to basically say that men should be punished for taking paternity leave is really problematic. And I think that's why so many men don't do it, is because they get a tremendous amount of pressure within the workplace, outside of the workplace, not to take it. But when men do take it, it sets a precedent that it's okay, which is ridiculous. But we have a lot to learn actually from European men who take quite a bit of paternity leave, although statistics are now showing that far fewer of them are taking it as much as they should. It's really important that we think about what this dual agenda of equity and effectiveness looks like. It's a very powerful tool that I don't think we lean into nearly enough.
I want to switch gears now a little bit to talk about your work at AJC and just ask you, how are you feeling now that it has been, or I think we're on month 4 now of the aftermath after the events of October 7th. How are you feeling? What does your work look like now? Tell us about that part of your life.
Oof. Well, it's an interesting question. How am I feeling is like a minute by minute change, right? I think that like so many of us who were profoundly affected by the during and immediate aftermath of October 7th, I was just in a profound state of shock and sadness, and also like go, go, go. And I think because of the work that I'm in and the field that I'm in, I work in the advocacy world, there was a need to respond very quickly, to put together materials very quickly, to understand what the situation was very quickly. And it took a couple of weeks for me to feel like I could finally take a breath to some extent. And once I did, it was like I exhaled and every emotion I've ever held inside of me came out. It's really a wild situation. I happened to wake up on the morning of October 7th. I turned over and looked at my phone at 4:30 in the morning. Anyone who's been to my apartment knows I don't have curtains, and it's actually it's a terrible thing. But so what happens is, because I don't have curtains, sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night because it's like bright. And I guess I had woken up and I, looked over and I saw the moon and I, turned over and looked at my phone and saw that I had 1 million text messages. And I was like, that is weird. What is going on? I looked at my phone. I obviously saw what had been going on and shot up in bed and immediately started texting every single person I knew in Israel, which I think, by the way, is probably exactly what everybody else did who has friends and family and loved ones and colleagues in Israel. I must have texted and called and sent voice notes for 2 hours straight. I also saw that a number of my other colleagues were awake at that moment. So we were all sort of like, what do we do in this moment? I heard back from a lot of people really quickly. I didn't hear back from some people for a week. And it was the longest week of my life, not hearing from cherished friends and colleagues. It was just truly overwhelming. In that moment, we just dove into action. That's what happened, is we just dove into action, trying to distill what was happening and transmit it and translate it for our lay leadership and for our community. As someone who not only works in this space, but as someone who is a really committed Zionist, someone who has definitely threatened my parents multiple times to make Aliyah, and at this moment have not done that. So sorry, mom and dad, for doing that so many times. Israel is my DNA. It's an extension of who I am. And when my Israeli friends and family and colleagues feel pain, I feel pain. It's like they are a limb that is attached to me. And when they hurt, I hurt. And I think a lot of people don't understand that unless you have experienced not only what it means to have a deep and meaningful connection to the land and to the people, but there's really something to be said for this sense of this invisible thread that binds us all. I can't explain it. It's just this like totally preternatural, supernatural thing where I feel this kinship and connection to my Israeli friends and family and strangers that is literally in my DNA. It's undefinable. So in the weeks after that, a lot of what we were doing was really just trying to message and get on as many media outlets as possible to explain and share what was happening, because we also knew that we probably had about like a 4 to 5 day window before things were going to take a turn. For a couple of days immediately following October 7th, public support was on the Israeli side, and we knew that there was going to be a very short window of time. So we really wanted to take advantage of that as much as possible to really inform the public and our own community of what had happened on October 7th. And to be honest with you, 120 days in, I think we're still trying to understand what happened on October 7th. The level of atrocity, the level of trauma, the level of just brutality is beyond human comprehension. And I think there are things we'll never know. And that is so deeply painful to me. I also think that in those days succeeding the 7th, we had a responsibility to lean into the pain and trauma and anger that we felt as a community. As Jews, we're often told our pain doesn't matter. Our pain is crocodile tears. Our fear is fake. Our fear is invented. In that moment, I felt a responsibility. I think many of us who work in this world, or frankly are just Jews, felt a responsibility to say, enough. We are not only valuable to you when we're dead. We're not only valuable to you as a placeholder in history. We are a vibrant, thriving, amazing people, and we're done. We're tired of pretending like this is normal. And in that moment, there were so many rallies, there were so many moments of joy that I was able to experience, moments of communal joy, moments of support and feeling like part of something that was so much bigger than myself. And I know that many of our AJC leaders and other people I know felt really similarly. And there were also so many moments where I felt like I was looking into this abyss and I didn't know where the bottom was. And frankly, 4.5 months later, there are a lot of days I still feel like that, where I'm looking at the bottom of the abyss and I'm like, when does this end? When will life feel normal? And I don't know the answer to that. But what I do know is that we work really hard at AJC not only to affirm and share the reality of what is happening to Jews all over the world, but also to honor and amplify the horrors that happened on October 7th. And frankly, also to name that we believe in the future of a two-state solution. We do at AJC. We believe that there is a day after tomorrow. We believe there is a day after October 7th. We believe in which there is a day in which Palestinians will be able to live a life of dignity and self-determination alongside Israelis. We believe that. We've always believed that. And yet there are people in this world who are vehemently opposed to this concept that that is possible. And a lot of my work and a lot of the work of my colleagues says we reject that. We fully reject that. And a lot of what I've been thinking about over the last few weeks and months is how do we uplift and amplify our community? How do we provide support to them? How do we create a space in which they can feel confident and secure? And also, how do we create a future that people wholly don't want for Jews and Palestinians? How do we do that?
I wanted to ask you about something that you mentioned earlier. You said that you knew you had a short window of opportunity before the narrative shifted to be critical of Israel. Mm-hmm. Why did you already know? How did you already know?
Well, I've been in this game a long time, but I will say that the first real social media war, and I say social media war not in the context of like Jews against Muslims or like Israelis against Arabs. I mean like the first war that took place in Israel that social media played like a significant role in transmitting information was in 2014. So that was Tzuk Eitan. It was a devastating war that lasted throughout the summer of 2014. And it was one of the first wars in which we saw the impact of Facebook, Twitter, I guess Instagram. Instagram was still relatively new at that time. And it transmitted information. And it was the first time that we were really able to see in real time the depths and horror and human impact of war. And it was also one of the first times that we really saw the tide turning in terms of public demonization of Israel. And listen, that's not new. That's been in existence since before the founding of the state. But, you know, the last major war that took place in 2006, the Second Lebanon War, Facebook was barely a concept. Everything we saw came through a newspaper, came through various online sources, but was filtered. And 2014 was unfiltered human experience in a way that we had never seen before. And in that way, 2014 was also the beginning of what we had really seen as a change in the way young Jewish people were responding to the conflict. It was the first time that we had seen Jews, young American Jews who had sort of been raised within, quote unquote, the system of Jewish day school, Jewish camp, Jewish advocacy, sort of turning and saying, wow, this is different than what I remember growing up with. And I sort of feel like I have not been exposed to the quote unquote truth. And there was a movement of young Jews to say this narrative, this Zionist narrative doesn't represent me. And that was the first time we really saw this confluence of social media and sort of a rejection of the Jewish communal story happening at the same time, or like, I guess the sort of American Zionist story coming together. And it was really groundbreaking watershed moment for our community and for the world. And that has only exacerbated in the years since. I'll say that May of 2021 was a conflict that also took place between Israel, and at that time, it was actually not Hamas. It was Palestinian Islamic Jihad, a different terrorist organization. And that was even more so. If we thought 2014 was the beginning of sort of the social media campaigns and social media wars, May of 2021 was really it. And I think that AJC and pretty much all Jewish organizations were wholly unprepared for what we experienced. Just a deluge of misinformation, a deluge of anti-Semitism, not only online, but in person. People were taking to the streets and attacking Jews for being Jewish. They were attacking synagogues, defacing synagogues. They were going up to people in sushi restaurants in Los Angeles saying, "Where are Jews? Are you Jewish?" and trying to physically attack them. It was really the first time that we were seeing in a serious way that Jews were being attacked for what was happening in Israel. American Jews were being attacked for what was happening in Israel. That was a very significant change from things that we had seen in previous years. And I think also, social media platforms were effectively going unchecked. People were posting whatever they wanted. They were posting memes. They were posting commentary. They were skirting around different moderation processes to post misinformation and lies and anti-Semitic content and hate speech. And it was the first time that we realized we were in a completely different war. We had the physical war on the ground and we had the digital war online. Since then, AJC has quadrupled our social media presence, and we're actually now seen as one of the leaders in putting out not only important content and accurate content, but AJC is what's called a first warning partner of every single social media platform, whether it's X or Meta or TikTok, or now things like Roblox, which I'm an adult woman, so I didn't know what Roblox was, which is no shade to adult women who play on Roblox. I just want to be very clear.
I also don't know what that is.
I didn't know what it was. Or like Fortnite, but essentially what these are is they're like real-time simulation games, and basically you can build your own universe, and kids and adults, but kids were building their own versions of October 7th happening in these games, and they would do these simulations and they were going unchecked, which is insane, by the way. We're now first warning partners of all these companies, and what that means is that we meet fairly regularly with their public policy and trust and safety team. There's a lot of work going on there, and I have so much respect for my colleagues who do that work daily. But we've learned a lot since then. But I knew, based on 2014, based on 2021, and based on any time there is some sort of inflagration that happens in the region, that there is always going to be a moment when this all burns down. We had a very brief window of when public support was on the Israeli side, and it took about 5 or 6 days for that to implode with the explosion at the Al-Shifa hospital, which was ultimately determined to be a misfired rocket from Palestinian Islamic Jihad. But the New York Times changed its headline 3 times. It first said that Israel was the one to explode this detonation that killed 500 people who were gathered in a parking lot. And then the New York Times changed their headline again. And then they changed it again to basically suggest that upon conclusion of European entities and American and Pentagon entities, that the rocket was a misfired rocket and it was not an attack on the hospital. So this is what we're dealing with here. But it was that explosion that actually really pivoted the public opinion away. And listen, I want to be really clear about a couple of things here. The situation that is happening in Gaza is beyond comprehension. And the reality is, I understand that there's a lot that we don't know. I suspect that the death toll is probably much higher than what is being reported, with the caveat that, of course, there are people included in that death toll who are Hamas terrorists, but there are an absolutely staggering number of civilians who have been killed, and I don't want to deny that fact at all. And it's horrific that that even has to be discussed. But what it comes down to at the end of the day is that Hamas started this war, and they do nothing to protect their civilians. They are more than happy to protect the Hamas terrorists who are underground, and more than happy to sacrifice the vulnerable who live above. Hamas had one job, and it was to return hostages. And there are still 130 plus hostages that we don't know where they are. At the end of the day, any death, any civilian death is horrific. It's beyond measure. And also, if there were any other situation in which any other country experienced that loss of civilian life by a terrorist organization, there would never be any doubt that a response would be warranted. That is one of the significant issues that we face when it comes to understanding how this war is playing out in real time. There is a clear indication of demonization and a clear indication of differentiation that Israel doesn't deserve to participate. And I think that this war will serve as a guide in many ways for how this kind of experience, what it looks like moving forward. But it's been really, really challenging.
The one thing I wanted to ask you about that I thought you had a very unique viewpoint on is for example, how I learned about AJC was the survey on the state of anti-Semitism that they publish every year. That's what I knew of AJC before I got involved with the organization, thanks to you. And something that I wanted to ask you about, it's a question that I have personally, I don't know if others have the same question, is what's the deal with the rise of anti-Semitism in light of events on October 7th? Is it as bad as we think it is? Is it as bad as it's being reported? What should the Jews do about it? I couldn't really get a sense of the base reality of the situation. And so I wanted to pick your brain about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I have to say, when you're like, what's the deal with anti-Semitism? I can't help but think of Jerry Seinfeld. Was like, what's the deal with anti-Semitism? But that's literally how I think about it because, immediately my brain goes to Seinfeld. But to answer your question, two things. First, it's actually really good timing in that the AJC 2024, or I guess it's really the 2023 State of Anti-Semitism report is actually coming out in 2 weeks. So we're going to have a really interesting assessment. And I'll just mention, I'm not giving away too much here because the information of the survey is still under wraps until it's released. But the survey went out into the field on October 5th. October 7th happened. We pulled the survey from the field because we said, this is just unprecedented. We're in a moment where we actually need to understand what's going on. We pulled the survey. We put it back in the field on October 9th. Those answers totally shaped the way everyone was feeling in that moment. Now, I understand that if we put the survey back in the field now, it might be different. Every week is different. But we really wanted to capture what was happening in the week immediately following October 7th, because again, there were two things happening simultaneously. One was the immediate aftermath of the 7th, which included an increase in anti-Semitic activity around the world, which I'll get to in a second. And the other is that the tide was beginning to turn against the Israeli operation. So those two things were happening simultaneously. So the results of that survey are going to be coming out in just a few weeks, but I think there are a couple trends that are really important for us to understand. The first is that there is a clear generational divide. And I want to be clear, this is not exclusively found in our survey. This is found across multiple surveys, whether it's the Harvard-Harris poll or whether it's any number of other polls that have come out since the 7th and frankly before the 7th. But what we understand is that there is a clear generational divide in that in many cases, Gen X and above has very different feelings about anti-Semitism and very different feelings about Israel. And younger generations feel very differently about Israel and anti-Semitism. What we know to be true is this. The 18 to 24 demographic or the 18 to 29 demographic, she's rough. It's rough out there for a lot of reasons. But what we know to be true for sure is that in the same breath, more Americans in that demographic, Jewish and non-Jewish, by the way, feel that Israel is like an apartheid genocidal state, which is obviously deeply concerning. And many of those people polled also don't believe that Israel has a right to exist and that's a colonialist entity. So that's one side. And then on the other side, we know that Jews between the ages of 18 to 29 are actually experiencing anti-Semitism at a way higher rate than everybody else. We can probably attribute that to the incidences of anti-Semitism happening online, whether that's direct messages that they're getting on TikTok or on Instagram or on Twitter, or it's people commenting on their videos or whatever it might be, or just the number and the volume of anti-Semitic content they're seeing online. So we know that that demographic is experiencing anti-Semitism at alarming rates. It's not to say that older generations aren't experiencing it. It's that they're experiencing it differently. Older folks might not be online quite as much, and younger people spend an inordinate amount of time on the internet, and they are exposed to anti-Semitic content in just a totally unprecedented way.
It seems like the people that experience anti-Semitism the most are then the same people that are saying that Israel is a colonial apartheid state. It's like a defense mechanism.
It's interesting. I mean, Listen, I would say that the majority of American Jews, especially young American Jews, don't think that Israel is a colonialist apartheid state that's committing genocide. Most of them don't. So we're clear. Although the percentage of young American Jews who do feel that way is rising, and it's definitely concerning. And I think there's a number of reasons we can attribute to that. The first is belonging, that they want to feel a sense of connection to other people, and they want to appear as though they're on the right side of history. So in agreeing to that mentality, they are accepted. They are belonging to the in-group, which is saying this is what's going on. I think also the way in which Israel's history or Israel's story is taught from a frame that suggests that it is a colonialist empire. And the reality is that it's not at all, actually. The definition of colonialism is that there is a country which says, I would like to settle land elsewhere and take it for myself and have my citizens settle here. And then it is mine now. I am the ruler. Last I checked, that's not how this works. This is Jews from all over the world who, by the way, have been living in Israel since the days of the Bible. I have friends whose families are 10th and 12th generation Jerusalemite. So at the end of the day, I don't know who you want to talk to about, settling the lands, but they've been there for literally thousands of years. So, and they have proven genealogy that demonstrates that they've been there for thousands of years. But I was in a discussion with this really interesting historian and professor named Moshe Halbertal, and he talks about how it's one thing when Britain would go to India or any of the other parts of the Commonwealth and say, okay, we are going here because there is a benefit to us. The benefit is resources, or the benefit is people, or the benefit is X, Y, and Z thing. It is a part of the Commonwealth. It is a part of the empire. In this case, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people from all over the world who are returning to their ancestral homeland. And by no means were necessarily looking to eradicate the people who already lived there, which for that matter included Jews. The concept of Israel being a colonialist entity is just factually incorrect. In the same way that when people apply the terminology of genocide to what's happening in Gaza, it's also factually incorrect and also, frankly, diminishes real genocide that currently or has taken place in the past, especially the fact that the term genocide was effectively used to describe the Holocaust. It's a real challenge when young people are using terminology or are adapting history to suit a particular narrative that doesn't actually apply in this context. Because the reality is what has happened in Israel and what has happened pre-state and post-state does not align with a traditional historical narrative. And that's really hard for people to conceptualize, for people to understand. So it's easier for them to put a square peg into a round hole because it works for them. And they're just jamming this peg and they're like, yeah, this is what it is. And it's actually not what it is. But there is such a mob mentality around this conversation that it creates an impossibility to have any sort of nuanced discussion or conversation. And frankly, I think the biggest thing that we're finding, and I won't mention her name on here, but I'll just say the other day, Access, the Young Professional Division of AJC, of which I'm the director, we hosted an amazing conversation with a content creator and influencer who is really doing the Lord's work of talking honestly about what her experience has been as a Jew online, even though her content itself is not explicitly Jewish in that it doesn't talk about Israel or Jewish things. It's Jewish in the sense that she's a Jewish woman and that bleeds through her work, but she's not a quote unquote Jewish content creator. But she spoke with us and she said that there is an assumption that a lot of us in the Jewish community are basing our experience off of, and that assumption is wrong. She said the assumption is that we can have conversations with people by using different tools that describe empathy for what's going on in the region with Gaza, with Palestinians, et cetera, et cetera. But the assumption is rooted in that the people you're having this or you're attempting to have this dialogue with believe that Israel is a legitimate entity. And the reality is a lot of these people, and especially young people online, don't actually believe that Israel is a legitimate entity. They believe that it is a settler colonialist state that was created by white Jews and that What happened on October 7th was an oppressed people who, after 75 years of oppression, have finally resisted and have caused revolution, and now they are achieving freedom. That is what people think. And they are taking back their legitimacy from an illegal and illegitimate entity. If that's the starting point, then there's no way you can have conversations with them about having empathetic discussion. Because if the baseline is that Israel is not a legitimate entity, then like you don't have a place to start. But the truth is that's actually where a lot of people on the internet are right now. So it's impossible to have these discussions. It's impossible to share like facts and figures and history, because that is a complete distortion. They're starting from a point where they say that this is not a real country. These are not a real people. The hostages are not real people. The people who died are a casualty of a colonialist, illegitimate empire. That's what we need to be addressing. I think that's one of the things that's really challenging. And I said this in this conversation, is that a lot of folks believe that one of the antidotes to this is Holocaust education. And I think that Holocaust education is part of the conversation. But I think what really needs to be happening is actually Holocaust education needs to be part of a wider discussion in terms of that schools from K through 12, universities, etc., actually need to be teaching anti-Semitism as a whole, understanding the terms, understanding the tropes, understanding the stereotypes, understanding what is actually anti-Semitic language, understanding the context in which anti-Semitism thrives, understanding how it historically played a role in the Jewish experience and how it currently exists now. Because if you only look at anti-Semitism and you only look at the Jewish experience through the lens of the Holocaust, then you've lost the plot. Because the Holocaust is the embodiment of anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism hasn't left. We say never again, never again, never again. Well, you know what? Never again has happened multiple times. What happened on October 7th was an intentional idea of literally eradicating Jewish people. So if we're talking about Holocaust education as the antidote, it is part of it. But what really needs to be happening is that we need to be engaging in real conversations about the history of anti-Semitism and how it currently manifests now. That's part of the education that we need to be utilizing, not just using the Holocaust as like it happened and we can never let this happen again. Like that, too late. It's too late.
It's really hard because I can't think of another instance where the founding of a state has been disputed and there's a completely different narrative around the history. We don't have a discrepancy like this in terms of a historical account for anything else that I'm aware of.
I think that one of the challenges that we face, and I said this in the beginning of our conversation, is that there is like a demand that we apologize for existing. It actually reminds me of, there's a movie, a really famous Israeli movie called self-advocacy, and it features the guy who played Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof, but he's a Yemenite Jew and he comes to Israel with his family. And to be honest, the movie is so profoundly amazing because it talks about how hard it was for Arab Jews to settle in Israel. They like did not have an amazing experience. And what the title suggests is they say that his name is Salah Shabati, but when you break it down, it basically translates to like, I'm sorry that I came, like I'm sorry that I arrived here, like I'm sorry that's what it translates to. So, you know, what I find really interesting about all of that is that oftentimes we're being asked to apologize for being here. Like, sorry we came here. Sorry we're here. Sorry we didn't have anywhere else to go. Sorry. All the time we're apologizing for like existing. And I think there are a number of reasons for why we feel the need to do that. Most of the time it's because we're like, we're just trying to survive. We're just trying to live out here. And if we keep our head down and we like apologize for existing, then like we'll be safe. And you know what? No, we won't. We never will be. So we might as well just be honest and say to ourselves, like, I'm tired of apologizing. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't care if they like me or they don't like me. They're going to kill me anyway. So what it comes down to is I am leaning into, and I'm encouraging so many people to do so, like lean into your Jewish moments, lean into your Jewish joy, lean into your Jewish heritage. Like, don't apologize. Don't apologize for it. I've stopped apologizing for it. And I don't want to say that I'm leaning into tribalism either, because I think one of the things that people can accuse is like, okay, well then when you like lean more into your community, then you ignore everybody else or you won't let anybody else in. And like, okay, there might be some days where I'm leaning more on my community and leaning more on my tribe because nobody else will have me. So I might as well lean on them. But I want to be clear. My commitment to ensuring safety and security of the Jewish people and not apologizing for existing and not apologizing for my history does not negate the fact that I want Palestinians to have that same opportunity. I want them to have the same opportunity to feel safe and secure and not be led by people who don't care if they live or die. That's really important to me. In the same way, by the way, that I want Israelis to be supported by an entity that wants to make sure that they are safe. So what it comes down to, if I could sort of distill down my message, is like, I'm done apologizing. I'm really proud of being Jewish. I'm really proud of being Zionist. That doesn't negate the fact that I have empathy and feel for Palestinian people and want them to live a life of dignity and freedom, and that I want an opportunity in which we can just exist safely.
Yeah, when this first started, I spent so much time posting on social media, sharing information, making videos myself. I spent hours every day helping my friends have difficult conversations. And then I think maybe like a month and a half in, or maybe 2 months in, I just stopped because I'm not willing to debate whether the earth is flat. And I'm also not willing to debate whether Israel has a right to exist. So it's just useless for me there's nothing I can offer if that's what we're debating.
Right.
And I think that's exactly what you're saying here. But I do want to ask, in your bio, you talk about being a glass half full person. Yeah. So what are you looking forward to? What are you excited about? Where do you see the glass half full in light of all of this?
It's actually really funny you say that, because I just saw a New Yorker comic where this waiter comes over and said, okay, who ordered the glass half empty and who ordered the glass half full? And I sent it to a lot of my friends and I'm like, haha, this is us, because a lot of people I work with and a lot of the people in my life are like deeply glass half empty people. And I'm always a glass half full person. Even now, there are days when I'm like, oh my God, my glass is empty. But there are also days where I'm like, okay, let's take a breath. So what are the things I'm optimistic about? I will tell you. In December, I went to Chile as a part of a delegation with AJC and working really closely with my colleagues in what's called the Belfer Institute for Latino and Latin American Affairs, aka BILA. We put on the most amazing leadership training retreat for emerging leaders between the ages of 22 and 40 from across 7 different countries in Latin America. We also had some Americans there too. And it was one of the most inspiring conversations and one of the most inspiring few days I've had in a long time, because even though we talked about challenges, which include anti-Semitism and rising anti-Israel sentiment in Latin America, which has real implications for the community. These communities are not that big. And, they're big in the sense of comparing to the size of Jewish communities around the world. But like the Jewish community of Peru has 1,500 people. The Jewish community of El Salvador has a couple hundred people. But then the Jewish community of Chile has like 40,000 people. So there's definitely diversity there. But one of the most inspiring elements was that there were all of these young people who are saying, put me in, coach. Like, I'm ready. I'm ready to assume leadership within my community. I'm not scared. I don't want to back down. And I'm ready to take the mantle. And that was an incredibly powerful and inspiring moment for me, because it's really easy for all of us to be like, I don't want to do this. This is hard. Like, it's awful and I'm tired and it's sad. And I don't want to put myself out there like that. And there were all of these amazing young people who were like, I'm ready. Let's go. Hineni. Moses says to God, I'm here. I'm ready. Hineni. And they all had their Hineni moment. And that's like the most incredibly powerful thing. So for me, that was my glass half full moment. Another area that I'm really excited about is that in AJC, we're focusing a lot on how we can connect young people with local and state government. What that means practically is that we want to make sure that the Jewish people are represented by elected officials who understand what they're experiencing. While the federal government is large, it's really local and state government that have the ability to be most bipartisan. And I think for an organization like AJC that is fiercely nonpartisan, we work on both sides of the aisle, we work with all three branches of government, it's really important that we're able to work in a bipartisan manner on issues that affect Jews. And by the way, other people too. We're seeing what happens when local governments like city councils make resolutions for ceasefire. Now, it doesn't have a real impact. Obviously, like the city council of Chicago passing a ceasefire resolution or the Democratic State Party of Washington declaring a ceasefire resolution has no real impact on whether the United States government puts forth a ceasefire resolution. But what we do know is that it detects a temperature. It shows the barometer of where elected officials are in terms of their thinking. What does that do? It creates a scenario in which Jews might not feel accurately represented by their officials. And in some cases, they might actually feel like those officials are putting them in harm's way. So what's really important is that we create opportunities for young Jews to become politically mobilized on both sides of the aisle, to feel like they have skin in the game in terms of how they are represented and who represents them. And frankly, I think this is a moment for young Jews on both sides of the aisle, both Republican and Democrat, to consider running for public office. Because if you are concerned about who is representing you and you don't feel represented, then like throw your hat in the ring. You know, I think it's really powerful. I think a lot of people don't want to run for public office because it's hard. Yeah, like it's hard. Of course it's hard. But it's hard because you're representing a constituency that is diverse. And if you are basically saying as an elected official, I actually reject the needs and experiences of a big part of my constituency, then like you're failing them as a civil servant. So I strongly feel that it's up to this generation of young Jews to say, I need to represent not only my community, but I need to represent my constituency. And it's time for me to get involved civically. And perhaps it's even time for me to run for public office. So I don't know if that's in my future. I've thought about it, but I think all of that to say, this is the moment for us to become politically engaged. We have an RNC and a DNC coming up in the next few months. We're hoping to be able to do some work while we're there. But this is really a moment for young people to demand a change in how the narrative about what Jews want and need is told about them. I think that's a really significant thing, is that there are some fringe groups of Jewish organizations who are saying, you know, I'm Jewish and this is how I feel. And therefore, you know, that gives certain elected officials the license to say, well, I'm speaking for all Jews when I talk about this. This is what the Jews want. And the reality is most Jews actually don't think that way and don't want that. So if we're going to represent the majority of American Jews' interests, then like, let's actually represent the majority of American Jews' interests. That's a really important thing that, you know, in addition to our work trying to cultivate next-gen leadership across Latin America and hopefully other places, we're also trying to cultivate next-gen leadership when it comes to how Jews approach like domestic political opportunities.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I have never considered a career in public office, but maybe this is my calling. Child pop star turned politician.
Yes.
So before we wrap up here, I wanted to ask you, how can people follow your work and connect with you?
Oh my gosh. Well, I would strongly recommend that you actually get involved with AJC. So you can learn more about us online at ajc.org. You can follow us on social media. You can follow us on Instagram at AJC Global. You can follow us on X and many other platforms. We're actually about to launch a TikTok very soon. But follow AJC. We have tens of millions of followers on all of our social media platforms, and we're putting out real-time, thoughtful, nuanced information that you can share with your friends and your family. And it's a great place to start. And if you want to get involved with AJC IRL, not just online, you can follow us at ajc.org/access, ACCESS. Access is the Young Professional Division of AJC. We'd love to have you get involved. We have about 13 chapters across the United States, as well as outside of the US, in Israel, in Paris, and across Latin America. So if you want to get involved, find us on the internet, ajc.org/access.
Okay, well, last question for you, Dana. Who would you like to nominate for the pod?
There are so many amazing people I'd like to nominate for this podcast, but I would like to nominate my cherished friend and business partner, Dr. Rebecca Tokatlilar. She currently serves as the Chief Program Officer for ATRA, which is formerly known as the Center for Rabbinic Innovation. She is a badass. She's a mama. She's my co-founder of Chutzpanit Consulting. She's my former boss at the Bronfman Center, and she's a cherished friend. And she just made Aliyah over the summer and can really share a lot about her experience. But she's brilliant and amazing, and she is someone you want to know.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have her on. And thank you again for coming in and doing this. It's a privilege to have you on as our first episode. We've covered so much together today, really like a whole suite of topics.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please go ahead and rate us 5 stars. Be the first to hear our episodes by subscribing to People You Want to Know wherever you get your podcasts. And for exclusive content, follow us on Instagram at People You Want to Know.